The HOA used my ranch water for 12 years without permission. When I drove back to my grandfather's ranch, I thought I was there to repair an old water pump before winter. Instead, I found an HOA crew smashing apart the cedar gate my granddad carved with his own hands back in 1964. The woman running the job stood there smiling, like she already owned the land beneath my boots. What she didn't know was that my grandfather left behind more than a ranch. He left records that could change everything in that valley. And before this story is over, an entire neighborhood is going to learn exactly who really owns the water keeping their homes alive. So if you enjoy stories about stubborn people, old land, quiet justice, and folks standing their ground the right way, go ahead and subscribe. We've got plenty more coming. You people really don't understand boundaries, do you? The woman said it with a smile while one of her contractors swung a sledgehammer straight through my grandfather's cedar gate. The crack echoed across the pasture like a rifle shot. Splinters exploded into the morning air. A carved piece of cedar spun through the dust and landed upside down near my truck tire. I recognized it immediately. Part of the longhorn skull Harold Mercer had carved into the crossbeam by hand back in 1964. I killed the engine of my F-250 and stepped out slowly. The Texas wind carried the smell of cedar sap, diesel exhaust, and fresh-cut wood. 20 yards ahead of me, 3 contractors in neon safety vests were tearing apart the only entrance to the Mercer Ranch, while a white SUV with Cedar Ridge Estates HOA decals sat idling beside the cattle guard. And standing beside it was a woman in a pressed navy polo, holding a clipboard like she'd been born with authority in her hands. Blonde ponytail, expensive sunglasses, perfect white teeth, Vanessa Cole. She looked me up and down once, work boots, faded jeans, oil-stained jacket, and dismissed me before I even spoke. "This area is restricted to Cedar Ridge residents," she announced. "You can't park here." One of the contractors slammed the hammer down again. Another section of the gate collapsed inward. I stared at the broken cedar in the dirt. "My grandfather built that gate." Vanessa shrugged. "Then your grandfather should filed proper maintenance paperwork with the HOA." For a second, I honestly thought I'd heard her wrong. I glanced past her toward the ridgeline. Beyond it sat the old Mercer cabin, and nearly 1,500 acres of ranch land that had belonged to my family longer than Cedar Ridge Estates had existed. "You're telling me," I said carefully, "that my grandfather needed permission from your HOA to maintain his own gate?" Her smile tightened. "I'm telling you this road and the surrounding access area are now community property. We've had repeated complaints about this structure being unsafe and visually inconsistent with neighborhood standards." Unsafe, visually inconsistent. Harold Mercer survived droughts, cattle thieves, and a tornado that ripped half the barn roof into the next county. But apparently what finally offended civilization was a cedar gate. The contractor nearest me hesitated before raising his hammer again. He looked maybe 25. Sunburned neck, nervous eyes. "You want us to stop?" he asked Vanessa quietly. "No," she snapped. "Finish the job." The hammer came down. The carved longhorn split clean down the middle. Something hot moved through my chest then, but I kept my face still. Losing your temper around people like Vanessa Cole only gives them something to use against you later. Instead, I pulled out my phone and started recording. Vanessa immediately straightened. "You can't film me without consent. In Texas I can." That annoyed her. "Good." I walked slowly toward the broken gate, filming the HOA SUV, the contractor logos, the debris scattered across the gravel. Then I stopped near the cattle guard and crouched beside the shattered cedar carving. The wood still smelled fresh beneath the dust. Harold used to carve at night on that cabin porch with an old pocket knife while country radio drifted through the screen door. I was 9 the first time he let me sand the edges of that longhorn skull. Now half of it sat in the dirt beside a bulldozer tire. I picked it up carefully. Behind me, Vanessa kept talking. As of last month, this section falls under Cedar Ridge Infrastructure Management. We mailed notices. No, you didn't. We absolutely did. My grandfather died 6 weeks ago. That finally slowed her down, just for a second. Then she recovered. Well, I'm sorry for your loss, she said, in the same tone people use returning damaged merchandise. But probate complications don't change property enforcement. I stood up, holding the broken carving under one arm. That's when I noticed something strange. The contractors weren't just removing the gate. Bright orange survey flags stretched far past the cattle guard, nearly 40 yards west of the actual subdivision boundary. One flag sat beside an old stone marker I recognized instantly. Harold's original property line marker. My eyes followed the flags deeper into ranch land, toward the Spring Road. Why the hell would an HOA be surveying that far onto Mercer property? A gravel crunch interrupted the thought. Another SUV approached from the subdivision entrance, this one with private security markings on the side. 2 men climbed out wearing black polos and utility belts like mall cops trying to play sheriff. Vanessa folded her arms. You need to leave now, Mr. Mercer. Something flickered across her face. Tiny, gone almost immediately. Still, I caught it. You're Harold Mercer's grandson? Yes. The wind shifted across the pasture. Somewhere behind the ridge, a windmill creaked slowly. Vanessa glanced toward the orange survey flags, then back at me. And for the first time since I arrived, she looked nervous. Only for a heartbeat. Then the smile came back. You should really speak to the HOA attorney before making assumptions about what belongs to you. One of the security guards stepped closer. Mom wants you off community property. I looked past him at the survey stakes running straight toward my grandfather's spring. Then I looked back at Vanessa Cole, and suddenly one thing became very clear. These people weren't tearing down a gate because they hated how it looked. They were trying to erase a boundary. I stayed at the ranch until sunset, watching the contractors finish their work. By the time the last cedar post hit the dirt, the entrance Harold Mercer built with his own hands looked like storm debris scattered across the gravel. Vanessa Cole never stopped smiling. Before leaving, she handed one of the security guards a folder and pointed toward the old access road leading deeper into the ranch. Orange survey flags stretched farther west than they had any business stretching, toward the spring. That bothered me enough I barely slept. The next morning, I drove my ATV down to the lower pond before sunrise. Harold always checked water levels first thing in the morning. Said a ranch could lie to you about almost everything except water. The pond stopped me cold. The shoreline had dropped nearly 3 feet overnight. Mud cracks stretched along the bank like broken glass. 2 bass floated belly up near the reeds. The wooden dock sat tilted sideways where the water had receded beneath it. What the hell? I killed the engine and crouched near the exposed shoreline. Fresh tire tracks. Heavy ones. Not ranch equipment. I followed them through the cedar brush running west along the tree line. About 200 yards later I heard it, the low mechanical hum of industrial pumps. Then I saw the pipe. Black commercial-grade pipeline, partially buried beneath loose dirt and scrub brush, thick enough to move thousands of gallons an hour. It disappeared straight into the hillside where Harold's natural spring fed the ranch pond. I stared at it for several seconds before moving again. Someone had installed this recently. The trenching marks were still fresh. The dirt hadn't even settled yet. The line continued under a cattle fence and toward Cedar Ridge Estates, toward the subdivision lake. I followed it another quarter mile until I reached the ridge overlooking the community. That's when my stomach tightened. The HOA lake sparkled bright blue in the morning sun, while 3 decorative fountains blasted water 20 feet into the air. Sprinkler systems hissed across perfectly green lawns. Meanwhile, my grandfather's pond was dying. A pickup truck door slammed behind me. I turned to find Sheriff Nolan Briggs climbing out of his county cruiser. Tall, gray mustache, wrinkled face that looked permanently tired. "Morning, Ethan." "Sheriff." He looked down at the exposed pipeline beside my boots and sighed slowly. "Figured you'd find it eventually." I folded my arms. "You knew about this?" "I knew Cedar Ridge had some kind of water-sharing arrangement with your grandfather years back. Didn't know the details. That line's pulling directly from Mercer Spring." Nolan nodded once toward the subdivision below us. "Vanessa's been telling residents your family abandoned water rights after Harold got sick. Says the HOA's been maintaining this system for years. My grandfather never abandoned anything." I figured. The sheriff studied the pipe another moment before lowering his voice. "Word of advice? Don't touch that line yet." I looked at him sharply. "Why not?" "Because right now this smells civil." He glanced toward Cedar Ridge. "Soon as somebody starts cutting pipes or blocking water flow, lawyers and injunctions start flying. Last thing you need is Vanessa Cole painting you as some angry rancher threatening the neighborhood." He wasn't wrong. That irritated me even more. Nolan handed me a folded business card. "County Records Office opens at 8. Might be worth checking what exactly Cedar Ridge thinks they own." Then he climbed back into his cruiser and drove off without another word. I spent the rest of the afternoon walking fence lines and photographing everything. Pipelines, survey stakes, drainage routes, every inch of disturbed ground near the spring. By evening, the wind had picked up hard across the pasture. Dust rolled through the broken entrance where Harold's gate used to stand. That site hit worse now, not because they destroyed it, because they destroyed it while trying to take something bigger. I was loading tools back into the barn when headlights rolled slowly up the ranch drive. An older woman stepped out of a silver Buick wearing jeans and a denim jacket despite the heat. I recognized her vaguely from town. Ruth Calloway. She lived inside Cedar Ridge. She looked nervous before she even spoke. "You're Harold's grandson?" "Yes, Mom." She glanced back toward the road like she didn't want anyone seeing her there. Then she handed me an old faded photograph. In it, Harold stood beside the spring sometime in the late 70s holding rolled survey maps under one arm. 3 men in suits stood beside him near a set of boundary markers hammered into the dirt. One of the men had Cedar Development Group printed on his hard hat. On the back of the photo, written in Harold's handwriting, were 7 words: "Spring lease meeting. Do not remove markers." I looked back up at Ruth. "What is this?" She swallowed hard. "Your grandfather used to say that spring was the only reason Cedar Ridge existed at all." The wind rattled loose tin on the barn roof. Then Ruth said the sentence that kept me awake all night. "I don't think Vanessa knows what your family actually owns." Before I could ask another question, headlights swept across the ranch road. Ruth stiffened immediately. "That's probably one of their patrol trucks," she whispered. "Don't mention I came here." She climbed back into her Buick and drove off fast enough to throw gravel against my barn door. 30 seconds later, a black Cedar Ridge security SUV rolled slowly past the ranch entrance. Not county security, HOA security. The driver stopped, just long enough to photograph my truck before continuing toward the subdivision. I watched the taillights disappear and realized something important. Vanessa Cole wasn't trying to settle a property dispute. She was trying to establish control before lawyers got involved. The next morning proved it. I woke to hammering outside the cabin. 3 bright yellow notices had been nailed directly into Harold's barn wall. Unauthorized occupation, water access violation, notice of community enforcement review. Each one carried the Cedar Ridge HOA seal at the bottom, like they were some kind of government agency. I ripped them down carefully and laid them flat on the kitchen table beside Ruth's photograph. Then I started a folder. Every notice, every photograph, every interaction. People like Vanessa counted on anger making mistakes. Harold taught me young that paperwork beats shouting every time. Around noon, I drove into town for supplies. That turned ugly faster than expected. The cashier at Miller's feed store avoided eye contact while ringing up my fencing wire. Two men near the coffee station stopped talking. The second I walked in, then I heard it. "That's the guy trying to shut off the neighborhood lake?" I turned slowly. Middle-aged man in a golf polo standing beside the bait freezer. He didn't even look embarrassed. "I'm not trying to shut off anything," I said evenly. He shrugged. "That's not what Facebook says, of course." By the time I got back to the truck, my phone had 3 missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize, and 2 voicemails accusing me of trying to steal community property. Vanessa was already building her narrative. Angry rancher versus innocent homeowners. That evening, Lily climbed into the passenger seat while I unloaded feed bags beside the barn. She held her tablet against her chest. "Dad?" "Yes, sweetheart? Why are people online saying Grandpa's ranch doesn't belong to us anymore?" That one landed harder than I expected. I set the feed bag down slowly. "Who said that?" "Some lady in the Cedar Ridge group." She hesitated. "Kids at school were talking about it too." For a moment, all I could hear was the windmill creaking behind the barn. Lily had her mother's eyes. Same quiet way of watching people carefully before speaking. Losing Anna 2 years earlier already forced that little girl to grow up too fast. Now she was getting dragged into HOA politics. I crouched beside her. "Listen to me carefully. That ranch belonged to your great-grandfather. Before him, it belonged to his father. Nobody gets to rewrite that because they printed something online." She nodded slowly. "But why are they lying?" "Because the truth scares them." I almost said it out loud. Instead, I smiled thinly and closed her truck door. That night, I walked the western fence line with a flashlight and camera, and finally started seeing the full picture. Fresh utility markers, new drainage trenches, recently buried conduit running toward Cedar Ridge. The farther west I walked, the worse it got. At one point, I found HOA survey stakes hammered nearly 60 yards inside Mercer property, beside an old irrigation channel Harold built decades ago. Someone wasn't preparing for negotiations. Someone was preparing ownership claims. The next morning, I drove to the county records office. Halfway there, I noticed the same black HOA SUV from the night before, following me 3 car lengths back. It stayed behind me all the way into town. When I parked outside the courthouse annex, the SUV parked across the street. A man wearing sunglasses remained inside, pretending to look at his phone. I photographed the vehicle and license plate before walking into the building. Inside, the clerk behind the records counter recognized my last name immediately. "Harold Mercer's grandson?" "Yes, Mom." She lowered her voice. "You've had a lot of document requests filed against your property this week. That got my attention fast." "What kind of requests?" "Boundary surveys, easement reviews, water access verification." "Who filed them?" She hesitated, then slid a printed request form across the counter. "Applicant, Cedar Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. Filed by Vanessa Cole. Request category, Community Expansion Review." I stared at the paper for several long seconds. Expansion, not maintenance, not access. Expansion. That meant one thing. Vanessa wasn't just trying to protect the HOA water system. She was trying to move the subdivision boundary itself. And suddenly, those orange survey flags near the spring made terrifying sense. I left the county records office with copies of every filing Vanessa Cole submitted that week. Boundary expansion requests, water infrastructure surveys, emergency access corridor reviews, all of it aimed west, straight into Mercer land. The black SUV followed me again when I drove back toward the ranch. This time I pulled onto the shoulder beside an old feed mill outside town and waited. 5 seconds later, the SUV slowed too. I stepped out of the truck, holding my phone up. The driver hit the gas immediately and disappeared in a cloud of dust. Good. Let them know I was documenting them too. By the time I reached the ranch, storm clouds were rolling over the valley from the north. Wind rattled the loose tin roofing above Harold's workshop, while I carried boxes of old records inside. I spread everything across the drafting table. County maps, property surveys, Ruth's photograph, the HOA filings. Something still didn't fit. Vanessa was moving too aggressively for someone bluffing. Either she genuinely believed Cedar Ridge owned part of the ranch, or she was desperate to secure something before the truth surfaced. The first raindrops hit the roof hard enough to shake dust from the rafters. That's when I noticed the floor. One cedar plank beneath the drafting table sat slightly higher than the others. Fresh scrape marks surrounded the nails like someone had lifted it before. I crouched beside it slowly. Harold wasn't the kind of man who hid things accidentally. I grabbed a pry bar from the tool wall and pulled the board loose. Underneath sat a narrow metal lockbox wrapped in oilcloth. My pulse kicked hard once. The combination lock was already open. Inside were rolled survey maps tied with faded twine, county water permits, and a weathered black notebook with Harold Mercer written across the front in block letters. I opened the notebook first. The first entry was dated June 1978. Cedar Development requested temporary access to Spring for West Valley project. Agreement limited to 25 years. No permanent transfer of water rights. I flipped pages faster. 1984, additional pipe installation approved. 1991, developer changed ownership. 1998, HOA assumes maintenance obligations. Then I hit the entry that stopped me cold. April 2011, contract expires next year. Renewal must be signed by Mercer Estate or water access terminates. I read it twice, then 3 times. The storm outside intensified, rain hammering the roof while wind pushed dust through gaps in the walls. I opened the folded legal documents beneath the notebook. There it was. Original water use agreement between Harold Mercer and Cedar Valley Development Corporation. 25-year temporary usage rights. Renewal only valid through written Mercer family approval. No automatic extension. No permanent easement transfer. No ownership rights. And according to the attached expiration notice, the agreement terminated 12 years earlier. I leaned back against the workbench trying to process the scale of it. Every sprinkler line. Every decorative fountain, every pond inside Cedar Ridge Estates, all of it depended on Mercer Ranch water access that legally expired over a decade ago. Which meant Vanessa wasn't protecting HOA property. She was hiding unauthorized use of my family's water system. Thunder shook the windows. I turned another notebook page and found a final handwritten entry dated less than a year before Harold died. If they ever forget whose water keeps this valley alive, remind them slowly. I stared at those words for a long moment. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number, I answered immediately. Ethan Mercer. A woman's voice responded sharp and professional. Mr. Mercer, this is Clara Bennett out of San Antonio. Sheriff Briggs contacted my office and suggested you might need a property attorney. I looked down at the expired agreement spread across Harold's table. I think I do. You sound like a man who just found something important. That obvious? Usually is. What kind of property issue are we talking about? I glanced toward the rain-covered window facing Cedar Ridge. Water rights, I said quietly, and possibly an entire subdivision operating where it legally shouldn't. Silence. Then, Clara's tone changed completely. Do not share copies of anything yet. Photograph every page immediately. And Mr. Mercer? Yeah? If your paperwork is real, this isn't an HOA dispute anymore. Lightning flashed across the workshop windows. Then headlights appeared outside. 2 of them. SUVs. I killed the lamp instantly and moved toward the wall. Engines idled near the broken ranch entrance. Doors opened. Voices carried through the rain. One of them belonged to Vanessa Cole. I know he's hiding records somewhere, she snapped. Search the outbuildings. I tightened my grip on Harold's notebook, because suddenly The storm outside wasn't the most dangerous thing on the ranch anymore. Vanessa's SUV headlights swept across the workshop windows, while rain hammered the roof hard enough to drown out the first few voices. Then I heard boots on gravel. "Check the barn first," Vanessa snapped. "If Harold kept records, they'll be somewhere dry." Another voice answered nervously. "Dean Hollowell, you sure this is smart? We don't have a warrant. We're conducting a community infrastructure inspection." Even in the dark, I almost laughed at that. Community infrastructure. They really believed saying official-sounding words made trespassing legal. I moved fast. I photographed every page of Harold's notebook with my phone, then shoved the original documents back into the lockbox and carried it behind a stack of feed barrels near the rear wall. A flashlight beam cut through the rain outside. The workshop door rattled once, locked. "Ethan!" Vanessa shouted through the storm. "Open this door." I stayed silent. Another flashlight swept across the window. Then headlights suddenly flashed blue across the pasture. "Sheriff Nolan Briggs," Vanessa cursed immediately. The sheriff stepped out into the rain, adjusting his hat low against the wind. "Evening, folks." Dean Hollowell straightened his jacket fast. "Sheriff, we're here conducting an inspection regarding unauthorized water access." Nolan looked at the workshop. "Middle of the night?" Vanessa crossed her arms. "We received reports Mercer may be tampering with HOA utility systems." Nolan's face didn't move. "Got a warrant?" Silence. "That's what I thought." He pointed toward the subdivision road. "Y'all need to leave." Vanessa's jaw tightened hard enough I could see it even through the rain. "This property is under active review by Cedar Ridge Estates." "No," Nolan replied calmly. "This property is under Bluestem County jurisdiction, and right now you're trespassing." That word hit her like a slap. Vanessa turned toward the workshop door one last time. "This isn't over, Ethan." Then the SUVs backed down the gravel road and disappeared into the storm. I waited until Nolan knocked before opening the door. He stepped inside, dripping rainwater onto the concrete floor, and immediately noticed the maps spread across Harold's drafting table. "You found something." I handed him the expired agreement without speaking. The sheriff read the first page slowly, then the second. Then he removed his hat and rubbed the back of his neck. "Well," he muttered quietly, "that explains why she's panicking. She knows. Oh, she absolutely knows." Nolan tapped the contract. "Question is how long she's known." I showed him Harold's notebook entries and the renewal clause. The sheriff whistled low under his breath. 12 years without renewal. He looked back toward the dark subdivision. "Jesus! Can they really claim any of this?" "Not legally." He paused. "But people with money and lawyers can create a whole lot of confusion before a judge untangles it." That was exactly what Vanessa was doing. Confusion first, ownership later. By morning, the war stopped pretending to be polite. I woke to the sound of heavy machinery. 2 landscaping bulldozers sat beside the Western Ranch Bridge, while a Cedar Ridge crew in reflective vests ripped apart guardrails with cutting torches. I drove down there immediately. Vanessa stood beside the equipment, holding an umbrella while Dean Hollowell pretended to review paperwork. "You tear down one more thing on this ranch," I said, "and I start filing criminal destruction charges." Dean stepped forward smoothly. "Mr. Mercer, this bridge sits inside a proposed community emergency corridor. Cedar Ridge has authorized structural modifications. Proposed doesn't mean approved. The county review is ongoing." I looked directly at Vanessa. "You knew the contract expired." A flicker crossed her face. "Gone instantly." "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Funny," I said, "because you got real interested in Harold's records last night." Dean's expression sharpened immediately. Vanessa shot him a quick glance. "Tiny mistake, but I caught it." Dean recovered fast. "My client has acted entirely within HOA authority. Your client illegally diverted water across Mercer property for 12 years. The bulldozer engines idled loudly behind us. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Vanessa smiled again. Cold this time. You really think some old paperwork scares me? No, I said evenly. I think discovery does. That landed. Dean looked irritated now, not confident. Good. Then my phone buzzed, unknown San Antonio number. I answered without taking my eyes off Vanessa. Ethan Mercer, Mr. Mercer, this is Avery Sloan with Channel 8 Investigations. Vanessa's smile faded instantly when she heard the reporter's name. Avery continued. I've been reviewing Cedar Ridge HOA financial disclosures this morning. I watched Dean slowly straighten. And, I asked, and somebody used HOA reserve funds to install a private water feature and pool renovation at Vanessa Cole's residence. Silence. Pure silence. Even the bulldozer operators stopped moving. Avery's voice stayed calm. I think we should talk. Vanessa looked at Dean. For the first time since this started, neither of them looked in control anymore. Dean lowered his voice. Do not answer that call in front of us. I kept the phone against my ear. Avery Sloan said, Mr. Mercer, I can meet you today. But I need documents, not accusations. You'll have them. Vanessa stepped closer. Anything you give the press will be treated as defamation, only if it's false. Her face tightened. Dean touched her arm, warning her to stop talking. Too late. The damage was already showing. That afternoon, I met Avery at Miller's feed store, in the back booth, where old ranchers usually drank coffee and solved the county's problems before breakfast. I gave her copies only, expired water agreement, photos of the buried pipe, Ruth's photograph, HOA notices, and the county filing marked Community Expansion Review. Avery flipped through the stack without blinking. This isn't a neighborhood dispute, she said. No, this is infrastructure fraud. That's what my attorney thinks. By then, Clara Bennett had officially taken the case. She called while Avery was still reading. I filed notice against Cedar Ridge Estates, Clara said. Illegal diversion, trespass, fraudulent management practices, and preservation demand for all financial records. What does that mean? It means if Vanessa deletes one email, she creates another problem. For the first time in days, I smiled. But Cedar Ridge felt the pressure immediately. 2 days later, drought restrictions hit the county. The State Water Board posted emergency limits on non-essential outdoor use. Cedar Ridge residents woke up to notices taped to mailboxes warning of reduced irrigation pressure and possible fountain shutdowns that should have been routine. Vanessa turned it into theater. She called an emergency HOA meeting that night inside the Cedar Ridge clubhouse. I went because Clara told me to show up, say little, and let Vanessa perform. The room was packed. Homeowners whispered under ceiling fans that clicked overhead. Outside the windows, dust blew across. Lawns kept too green for a county running dry. Vanessa stood at the podium, wearing a cream blazer and controlled panic. This crisis, she announced, is being manufactured by one hostile landowner attempting to extort our community. Every head turned toward me in the back row. I stood slowly. I'm Ethan Mercer. My family owns the spring your system pulls from. I have the original agreement. It expired 12 years ago. Vanessa laughed once, sharp and fake. That document is irrelevant. I held up a copy. Then you won't mind residents reading it. The room shifted. A man near the aisle reached for it first, then a woman behind him. Soon copies were moving down rows. Dean Hollowell rushed to the podium. These papers have not been authenticated. Ruth Calloway stood before I could answer. Her voice shook, but it carried. They're real. The room went quiet. Vanessa stared at her like she'd been betrayed. Ruth gripped the back of a folding chair. Harold Mercer came to this board years ago. He warned us the water agreement needed renewal. Vanessa said she'd handled it. She told us not to worry. Murmurs spread fast. One resident shouted, "You knew?" Vanessa snapped, "Ruth is confused." Ruth's face hardened. "I am 81, not stupid." That broke something open. Questions flew from every direction. How long has this been expired? Are our dues paying for illegal water? Why didn't we vote on this? Vanessa pounded the gavel so hard the microphone squealed. This meeting is adjourned. Nobody moved. For the first time, the residents weren't looking at me like the threat. They were looking at her. Outside, I found Lily waiting in Clara's truck with headphones on and a half-finished coloring book in her lap. Clara had watched her while I went inside. "How'd it go?" Lily asked. I looked back at the clubhouse windows where silhouettes argued behind the glass. People are starting to ask the right questions. My phone buzzed. Avery Sloan. Her message was only 8 words. "Full investigation airs tomorrow. Vanessa won't survive it." Across the road, Cedar Ridge's giant fountain kept spraying stolen water into the dry night air, but now everyone could hear it. The next evening, Avery Sloan's investigation aired at 6. I watched it from Harold's cabin, with Lily asleep on the couch under her butterfly blanket, and Clara Bennett on speakerphone. The first shot was drone footage. Cedar Ridge Estates looked perfect from above. Curved streets, blue lake, green lawns, stone fountains, backyard pools glowing under the Texas sunset. Then Avery's voice cut through it. "Tonight, Channel 8 investigates whether one of Bluestem County's wealthiest neighborhoods has been using private ranch water for over a decade without a valid agreement." The screen shifted. A red boundary line appeared over the footage. Mercer Ranch. Then a blue line appeared. The buried pipeline. It ran from Harold's Spring straight into Cedar Ridge's lake system, like a vein. Clara said quietly, "That visual is going to hurt them." Avery showed the expired agreement next. The camera zoomed in on the renewal clause. Written Mercer estate approval required. No automatic extension. Expired 12 years ago. Then came the financial records. HOA reserve checks, vendor invoices, payments marked water feature repair and landscape enhancement. Avery stood outside Vanessa Cole's house, while camera footage showed the private backyard pool, tiled waterfall, and irrigation lines tied into the same Cedar Ridge water network. According to financial disclosures reviewed by Channel 8, tens of thousands in HOA reserve funds appear to have been spent on improvements connected to President Vanessa Cole's private residence. I heard Clara exhale through the phone. That's enough for state attention. She was right. My phone started lighting up before the segment ended. Unknown numbers, texts, voicemails, some angry, most scared. "Is our water illegal? Can you shut us off? Are our homes at risk?" I didn't answer any of them. Clara had given me one instruction: say nothing public until legal filings were complete. Vanessa did not follow that advice. At 6:42 p.m., she posted a video to the Cedar Ridge residents group. Her makeup was perfect, but her eyes looked frantic. "This is a smear campaign by a disgruntled outsider," she said. "Cedar Ridge has always lawfully maintained its infrastructure, and no one should be intimidated by forged documents or sensational reporting." Forged. That word mattered. Clara texted me immediately. She just made the defamation claim easier. By 8 o'clock, 2 HOA board members had resigned publicly in the comments. By 9, residents were gathered outside the clubhouse demanding answers. By 10, Sheriff Nolan Briggs called. "You need to get to the north gate." His voice had no patience left in it. Why? Because Vanessa just hired tanker trucks. I was in my pickup in 4 minutes. The ranch road was dark, except for the headlights lined up at the broken gate. 3 white water trucks idled near the old cattle guard, hoses coiled on their sides, drivers standing around looking uncomfortable. Vanessa stood under the glow of headlights with Dean Hollowell beside her, waving paperwork at Sheriff Briggs. "This is an emergency community action," she said. "We have residents depending on water access." Nolan stood between the trucks and my property line. "Those trucks cross that cattle guard, I start writing citations." Dean stepped forward. "Sheriff, Cedar Ridge has historical usage rights. Show me a current agreement." Dean didn't answer. Vanessa pointed at me when I stepped out of the truck. "This is his fault. He created panic. He's threatening families." "No," I said. You created panic when you hid an expired contract. A few Cedar Ridge residents had followed the commotion and gathered near the gate. Ruth Calloway stood among them with her arms folded. One of the tanker drivers looked from Vanessa to the sheriff. "Mom, I was told this was authorized." "It is," Vanessa snapped. Nolan shook his head. "Not by the landowner." That was the first time he said it in front of everyone. Landowner. The word changed the air. Dean pulled Vanessa aside and whispered hard into her ear. She jerked away from him. "I am not surrendering this community to a rancher with a box of old papers." Clara's headlights came up behind me then. She stepped out in a dark suit, holding a thick envelope. "Those old papers were filed with the district court at 5:17 this afternoon," she said. "And the Texas Attorney General's office opened a preliminary inquiry 20 minutes ago." Vanessa froze. Clara handed Dean a copy. "Fraudulent assessment practices, unauthorized diversion, possible embezzlement. Preservation order for HOA records is pending." Dean's face went pale as he scanned the first page. Behind him, the tanker engines kept rumbling in the dark. Then one by one, the drivers climbed back into their trucks. The first truck reversed, then the second, then the third. Vanessa stood in the dust watching them leave. No gavel, no clipboard, no crowd control. Just a woman discovering that panic was not authority. Sheriff Briggs looked at her and said, "Go home, Miss Cole." She didn't move, so he added, "Before tonight gets worse." For the first time since she tore down Harold's Gate, Vanessa Cole obeyed. But obedience was not surrender. By sunrise, Clara Bennett had 3 emergency motions from Dean Hollowell sitting in her inbox. Vanessa claimed I was endangering public health, threatening water access, and interfering with essential community infrastructure. Clara read the first page over coffee at my kitchen table and laughed once. "Desperation has a formatting style," she said. At 10 that morning, Judge Miriam Tate denied all 3 motions. Her order was short enough to fit on 1 page. Cedar Ridge Estates has not established legal ownership, valid easement, or current contractual authority over the disputed water system. Clara slid the paper across the table. That sentence just moved the battlefield. Vanessa felt it, too. By noon, 2 more board members resigned. By 3, Cedar Ridge's treasurer emailed residents, saying he had never been shown the expired water agreement. By sunset, Dean Hollowell called Clara, asking whether temporary settlement discussions might be possible. "Clara, put him on speaker." Dean's voice sounded thinner than it had at the bridge. "My client wants to avoid unnecessary harm to homeowners. Your client authorized trespass, destruction of property, and illegal pumping attempts," Clara said. "Homeowners are not the shield anymore. We can discuss water access terms. We will in court." She ended the call before he could answer. I should have felt I didn't. That evening, Lily and I worked beside the broken ranch entrance, sorting the salvageable cedar planks from Harold's Gate. She wore work gloves too big for her hands and lined the carved pieces in the dirt like puzzle fragments. "Can we fix it?" she asked. "We can rebuild it. With the same longhorn?" I picked up the split carving. "We'll use what's left. Grandpa would like that better." She nodded and brushed dust from the wood with careful fingers. For the first time in weeks, the ranch felt quiet. Not safe, just quiet. That lasted until Clara called after dark. "I found something," she said. Her tone was different, tight, controlled. "What?" Vanessa submitted annual infrastructure disclosures to the county for the last 12 years. I thought the HOA hid the expired agreement. They did from residents, not from the county. Papers rustled on her end. Every year, Vanessa certified that Cedar Ridge maintained valid water access authorization. I stood still beside the half-rebuilt gate. She signed that after the agreement expired. Every year. Could she claim she didn't know? Not after what I just found attached to the 2014 filing. Clara emailed it while we were still on the phone. I opened the file on my truck hood under the porch light. It was a scanned letter from Harold Mercer to Cedar Ridge Estates, dated March 2014. Formal notice of expired water use agreement. Written renewal required. Unauthorized diversion must cease. The certified mail receipt was attached. Signed by Vanessa Cole. My mouth went dry. She knew, I said. Yes, Clara replied. And she certified the opposite for 12 straight years. The next morning, Sheriff Briggs came by while I was tightening new cedar beams into place. He held a sealed envelope. Day asked me to deliver this personally. Inside was a notice confirming the county had opened a criminal review into property destruction and document falsification tied to Cedar Ridge. Nolan looked at the rebuilt gate frame. Harold would have liked seeing that go back up. He would have hated the reason. Maybe. The sheriff glanced towards Cedar Ridge. But he'd respect how you're doing it. By afternoon, Vanessa made one final public appearance. She stood outside the clubhouse, surrounded by fewer supporters than cameras, and claimed she was the victim of a coordinated attack by outside interests. Avery Sloan asked one question. Miss Cole, did you sign the 2014 certified notice acknowledging the Mercer water agreement had expired? Vanessa froze. Not long, but long enough for every camera to catch it. Dean Hollowell stepped in front of her and ended the interview. That clip ran at 6. By 7, Cedar Ridge residents were openly demanding Vanessa's resignation. By 8, Clara sent me the final court schedule. Quiet title hearing, financial injunction, emergency ownership determination, all set for the following Tuesday. I stood at the ranch gate after dark, one hand on the new cedar beam, looking across the dry pasture toward Cedar Ridge's silent fountain. For weeks, Vanessa had acted like she owned the valley. Now every signed paper said otherwise. The county courtroom was full before 9. Cedar Ridge homeowners packed the benches shoulder to shoulder. Ruth Calloway sat near the aisle with both hands around her purse. Avery Sloan stood against the back wall with her cameraman. Sheriff Briggs leaned beside the door, quiet and still. Vanessa sat at the defense table, in a gray suit, staring straight ahead. Dean Hollowell looked like a man trying to calculate how much distance he could put between himself and his own client. Judge Miriam Tate entered without ceremony. Let's begin. Clara Bennett stood first. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Your Honor, this case is simple. Mercer Ranch owns the spring. Mercer Ranch owns the surrounding easements. Cedar Ridge Estates received temporary water use rights under a written agreement. That agreement expired 12 years ago. She placed Harold's original contract on the evidence table. Then the renewal clause. Then the county filings. Then the pipeline maps I had photographed myself. Every document landed like another nail. Clara continued. Despite expiration, Cedar Ridge continued diverting water, collecting dues, expanding infrastructure, and representing to homeowners and county agencies that valid authorization existed. Dean stood slowly. Your Honor, Cedar Ridge acknowledges there may have been administrative confusion regarding renewal. Judge Tate looked over her glasses. Administrative confusion for 12 years. A low murmur moved through the gallery. Dean swallowed. We do not contest that the written agreement expired. That was the moment the room changed. People who had spent years paying dues to Cedar Ridge suddenly understood what he had just said. The HOA had no legal water agreement. Clara stepped forward again. And we have more. She introduced the 2014 certified letter from Harold Mercer, signed by Vanessa Cole, proving Vanessa had been notified the agreement expired. Then came 12 years of infrastructure disclosures, each one carrying Vanessa's signature, each one claiming Cedar Ridge had valid water authority. Finally, Clara placed the financial records on the table. HOA reserve checks, private contractor invoices, payments tied to Vanessa's backyard pool, waterfall, and landscaping system. Judge Tate's face went cold. Miss Cole, did you sign these disclosures? Vanessa looked at Dean. Dean didn't move. Yes, she said quietly. Did you receive the 2014 notice from Harold Mercer? Her mouth opened once, closed. Yes. The courtroom went silent. Clara's voice cut through it. Your Honor, my client seeks legal recognition of ownership over the spring, the easements, and the infrastructure crossing Mercer Ranch. We also seek an injunction preventing Cedar Ridge from accessing, modifying, or representing ownership over those systems without written approval from the Mercer estate. Dean stood again, but slower this time. Your Honor, Cedar Ridge will concede the water rights and easement question. Vanessa turned toward him sharply. What are you doing? Dean kept facing the judge. We cannot dispute the documents. That sentence broke her. You work for me, Vanessa hissed. Judge Tate struck the bench once, Miss Cole, but the damage was done. A woman in the second row started crying. A man behind her said, she knew. Someone else whispered, we paid for her pool. Then a woman in a dark blue suit stood from the side row. Your Honor, Renata Lopez, appearing on behalf of the Texas Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division. Based on evidence submitted today, our office is opening civil action regarding fraudulent assessments, misappropriation of HOA funds, and unlawful representation of property rights. Vanessa's face drained of color. Sheriff Briggs stepped forward from the back wall. Judge Tate looked at him, then at Vanessa's. Miss Cole, you will remain available for investigators. Clara leaned toward me and whispered, this is over. But it didn't feel over yet, because now everyone in that courtroom knew I had the power Vanessa spent years pretending she had. The power to decide what happened to Cedar Ridge's water. Judge Tate turned to me. Mr. Mercer, before this court considers final injunction terms, do you intend to terminate water access to the subdivision? Every eye in the room landed on me. Vanessa looked at me for the first time that day. Not smug now, afraid. And for one quiet second I understood exactly what Harold meant when he wrote, remind them slowly. Judge Tate waited. So did every homeowner in that courtroom. I stood slowly, feeling the weight of it all. Harold's gate, Lily's questions, the dead fish in the pond, Vanessa's smile while my family's land was treated like public property. No, Your Honor, I said. I do not intend to terminate residential water access. A sound moved through the gallery. Relief, confusion, maybe shame. I kept going. I'm not here to punish families who were lied to. I'm here to stop the people who lied. Vanessa looked down at the table. Clara handed Judge Tate our proposed settlement plan. Every Cedar Ridge household would receive a direct, long-term water lease through the Mercer estate. Fair rate, transparent records, no HOA control over Mercer water, land, or easements. No board member could alter the agreement without court approval. Judge Tate read the first page, then looked at me. This is generous, Mr. Mercer. It's reasonable. She nodded once. Then the court will enter temporary recognition of Mercer estate control over the spring, easements, and related infrastructure pending final order. Cedar Ridge Estates is restrained from accessing or modifying those systems. The HOA board is suspended from water-related authority immediately. The gavel came down. Vanessa flinched. Sheriff Briggs stepped beside her table with two investigators from the Attorney General's office. He didn't touch her. He didn't need to. Mrs. Cole, he said quietly, we need you to come with us. For once, she had no speech, no clipboard, no threat. Dean Hollowell gathered his papers without looking at her. By the end of that week, he had resigned as Cedar Ridge's attorney. By the end of the month, the HOA board collapsed completely. State investigators filed fraud and property destruction charges against Vanessa. The reserve accounts were frozen. The illegal expansion filings were withdrawn. And the first thing I repaired was the gate. Frank from Cedar Ridge donated cedar beams from his old barn. Ruth Calloway brought coffee every morning and sat in a folding chair while Lily helped me sand the rescued longhorn carving. We kept the crack down the middle. Lily said it made the skull look like it survived something. She was right. 3 months later, the spring rain came hard over Bluestem County. Not violent, just steady. The kind of rain that fills low places and forgives dry ground. The ranch pond rose inch by inch until the dock floated level again. Water pushed through the reeds. Frogs came back first, then dragonflies, then the flash of bass beneath the surface. Cedar Ridge signed every lease, every household. Not through fear, through paper, through truth. Through the kind of agreement Harold would have respected because everybody could read it, and nobody had to guess who owned what. We turned the old workshop into the Mercer Land and Water classroom. Kids from Cedar Ridge came out on Saturdays to learn about wells, springs, fence lines, native grass, and why property records matter. Avery Sloan did one final story on it, but I didn't watch that one live. I was outside with Lily planting cedar saplings beside Harold's grave. She pressed dirt around the roots with both hands. Dad, yeah? Would Grandpa be proud? A hawk circled high over the ridge where the old survey flags had once cut across our land. Below it, the rebuilt gate stood alcid in the sun, longhorn carvings scarred but whole. I looked across the pasture, toward the pond, toward the spring, toward a neighborhood that finally understood the difference between using land and respecting it. He'd just be glad, I said. The land finally remembers who cared for it. Lily smiled at that. Then she handed me another cedar sapling. How many are we planting? I looked toward the water flowing clean down the old channel Harold had protected all those years. All of them.
I think the real lesson is on this. Most fights in life aren't won by shouting louder than the next person. They're won by knowing what matters, keeping your record straight, and refusing to let fear or pressure push you off your own route. Harold understood that. He didn't leave behind money or power. He left behind patience, proof, and the kind of quiet authority that still means something in this country. And honestly, that's probably why this story stayed with me. Not because someone lost, not because somebody got exposed, but because a family's land, histories, and dignity were protected without tearing the whole community apart in the process. These days, a lot of folks feel like standing up for yourselves has to mean becoming loud or bitter. I don't think that's true. Sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is stay calm, tell the truth, and let the facts speak for themselves. Now, I'm really glad to hear from you. Have you ever dealt with HOA property dispute or neighbor who thought they could push people around? Drop a yes in the comments if you believe staying in your house still matter. And if story glad it means something to you, surprise, stick around. There are plenty more stories about land, resilience, and ordinary people refusing to back down the right way.